The stage lights were blinding. The audience buzzed with impatience. And standing at the edge of the curtain, a young man from a small province in the Philippines clutched the hem of his worn-out shirt, whispering a prayer so quiet that only God and the ceiling could hear it. His name was Carlo. And nobody in that arena believed he belonged there. He had traveled 42 hours to reach that audition hall. Not by plane. Not by train. By a combination of jeepney, overnight bus, and borrowed money from his elderly grandmother who sold her only gold ring to give him this one chance. The other contestants had coaches, managers, matching outfits, and confidence that filled the room before they even opened their mouths. Carlo had none of that. He had holes in his shoes, a voice he had trained alone in a rice field, and a dream so heavy it bent his spine. When his name was called, the laughter started before he even reached the microphone. Not cruel laughter, just the kind that leaks out when people have already made up their minds. Someone in the front row leaned over and whispered something. Heads turned. Smiles spread. Simon Cowell leaned back in his chair with the expression he reserved for people he fully expected to waste his time. The other judges shuffled their papers. The audience scrolled their phones. Carlo stood at the center of that enormous stage and looked out at 1,000 strangers who had already decided his story was over before it began. He adjusted the microphone with trembling hands. The host asked where he was from. He answered quietly. Someone laughed again. He was asked what he did for work. He said he sold street food. He said his mother was sick. He said he had been singing since he was 4 years old on the steps of a church where nobody paid attention but God always listened. Simon said, in that flat and devastating voice of his, and why exactly should we believe tonight will be any different? Carlo looked at him. Not with anger. Not with fear. With something rarer than both. He looked at Simon Cowell with peace. The kind of peace that only comes from a person who has already survived every version of losing and decided to show up anyway. He nodded once, turned to the pianist, and said 2 words, whenever you're ready. The first note silenced the room. Not gradually. Not slowly. Instantly. The way thunder stops conversation. The way a single candle defeats a room full of darkness. His voice rose from the stage, and it was not the voice of a street food vendor or a desperate young man or a boy from a forgotten province. It was something ancient and aching and extraordinary. It was the voice of every person who had ever been told they were nothing and kept singing anyway. Halfway through the song, a woman in the 3rd row began to cry. She didn't know why. She would tell her husband later that it felt like something inside her chest cracked open in the best possible way. Behind her, a man who hadn't cried since his father's funeral pressed his fingers to his mouth. Children who had been whispering and fidgeting went still. The phones disappeared into pockets. The world outside that arena stopped existing. Simon Cowell sat forward in his chair. That movement. That single, almost imperceptible lean forward. The audience saw it and erupted before the song was even finished. Because they knew what it meant. Everyone who had ever watched Simon Cowell knew what it meant. It meant that something real was happening. Something he had not planned for. Something that had broken through the wall he spent decades building. When the last note faded, the silence lasted 3 full seconds. Then the arena exploded. The standing ovation came from every corner of the room at once. Judges stood. Staff stood. Security guards who were supposed to stay professional stood. Simon Cowell rose slowly from his chair, and for a moment he said nothing, which was louder than anything he could have spoken. When he finally found words, he said this, I have sat in this chair for more years than I care to remember. I have heard thousands of voices. I have said no to people I regret and yes to people I forgot. But I have never, not once, heard anything that made me feel the way your voice just made me feel. You didn't just sing a song. You made every single person in this room remember why music exists. Carlo stood at the microphone and wept. Not from sadness. From the specific, overwhelming relief of being seen after a lifetime of invisibility. His grandmother's gold ring had bought him 42 hours of travel and 2 minutes on a stage. And in those 2 minutes, the world changed. Because that is the thing about real talent. It does not ask permission. It does not need perfect shoes or professional management or the approval of a single skeptical man in a black chair. It only needs one moment. One stage. One note sung from a place so honest and so deep that even the most guarded heart in the room cannot defend itself against it. Carlo got 4 yes that night. He got something rarer too. He got proof. Proof that his grandmother was right. Proof that the rice fields heard him. Proof that showing up, broke and trembling and laughed at, was not weakness. It was the bravest thing a human being can do. And the world, when it finally listened, had no choice but to stand.